Picture this. You're a Black Army staff sergeant deployed to Afghanistan, fighting for your country's freedom. Back home, you own a beautiful ranch that's been in your family for 3 generations. 40 acres of Texas land with a farmhouse your grandfather built with his own hands. While you're dodging bullets overseas, your HOA decides they want your property. So they do something so illegal, so morally disgusting, that when the United States Army found out, they didn't just fight back. They went to war. They sold your ranch. While you were deployed, for unpaid fees you never owed. But here's what this racist HOA board didn't know. When you mess with a deployed soldier's property, you're not just breaking civil law. You're violating federal military protection statutes. And the U.S. Army doesn't negotiate with people who steal from their soldiers. What happened next became the largest military intervention in civilian housing disputes in American history. We're talking federal investigations, criminal prosecutions, and the Army literally seizing an entire HOA community and returning every single house to the original owners. This story has everything: racial injustice, military protection laws, federal intervention, and justice so complete it redefined how America protects deployed soldiers' property rights. So buckle up, because you're about to hear how one HOA's racist land grab triggered a military response that destroyed an entire corrupt community development and sent people to federal prison. Meet Staff Sergeant Marcus Big Country Williams, 6th-generation Texan, 3rd-generation Army, and the proudest owner of the Williams family ranch you'd ever want to meet. At 35, Marcus stood 6'4", carried himself with military bearing, and had the kind of quiet strength that came from serving 3 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Williams Ranch wasn't just property, it was legacy. 40 acres outside San Antonio that Marcus's great-great-grandfather had purchased in 1905 with money saved from working the railroads. His great-grandfather had expanded it during the Depression. His grandfather had built the main house in 1952 with limestone blocks he'd quarried himself. Marcus's father had served in Vietnam, and when he came home, he'd modernized the ranch while keeping its historical character. Solar panels, updated plumbing, modern kitchen, but the same front porch where 4 generations of Williams men had sat watching Texas sunsets. When Marcus inherited the ranch in 2018, he made a promise to his dying father. This land stays in our family, period. Marcus had big plans. After his final deployment, he was going to retire from the Army and turn the ranch into a veteran rehabilitation center, a place where soldiers dealing with PTSD could work with horses, grow food, and heal on land that understood the sacrifice of military service. But in 2020, Marcus got orders for his 4th deployment to Afghanistan. 15 months, training Afghan military forces. Dangerous work, but somebody had to do it. Before deploying, Marcus did what every responsible property owner does. He made sure everything was handled. Property taxes paid 2 years in advance. Insurance current. Maintenance contracts signed. His neighbor, an elderly white rancher named Bob Martinez, agreed to check on the property weekly. Here's where things get interesting. In 2019, while Marcus was stateside, a luxury development called Heritage Hills Estates had been built on land adjacent to the Williams Ranch. Big houses starting at $600,000. Golf course, country club, the whole upscale suburban fantasy. The developer, Premium Communities Corporation, had tried to buy Marcus's ranch multiple times. They offered $2 million, then $3 million, then $4 million. Marcus wasn't interested. His ranch wasn't for sale at any price. So Premium Communities did what developers do when they can't buy land they want. They built around it. They designed Heritage Hills Estates to completely surround the Williams Ranch, then marketed the development as luxury living with authentic Texas ranch character. The marketing was brilliant and disgusting at the same time. Brochures showed the Williams Ranch as a charming historical centerpiece while advertising exclusive country club living with genuine working ranch ambiance. Buyers paid premium prices, specifically to live next to the Williams Ranch, but here's the problem with that. Strategy. Once people pay luxury prices for a house, they start feeling entitled to control everything around them. The first complaint started in late 2019. The Williams Ranch was too authentic. Marcus's cattle made noise. The ranch roads created dust. The property wasn't landscaped to community standards. Marcus handled these complaints diplomatically. He explained that his ranch had been there for over a century, that it was agricultural property with grandfathered rights, and that he maintained it according to historical preservation standards. Most neighbors accepted this explanation. But the Heritage Hills HOA board had different ideas. The board was led by Preston Whitfield III, a real estate investor who'd moved to Texas from Connecticut and immediately started buying properties to flip. Preston saw the Williams Ranch as 40 acres of prime development land being wasted on historical preservation and cattle grazing. Vice President was Melissa Crawford, an interior designer who'd made a fortune staging homes for wealthy clients. Melissa believed the Williams Ranch lowered the aesthetic standards of Heritage Hills and was incompatible with luxury community values. The treasurer was Richard Blackstone, a retired corporate attorney who specialized in property law and knew exactly how to use legal technicalities to pressure property owners. These three had a plan. Since they couldn't buy the Williams Ranch, they were going to find a way to take it. Their first move was attempting to force Marcus to join the Heritage Hills HOA. They claimed that since his property was surrounded by community amenities, he should pay HOA fees and follow community guidelines. Marcus consulted his own attorney and confirmed what he already knew. His ranch predated the development by over a century and couldn't be forced to join an HOA that didn't exist when he bought the property. The board's next move was harassment through local government. They filed complaints with the county claiming Marcus's ranch violated zoning regulations, noise ordinances, and health department standards. Every complaint was investigated and dismissed. Marcus's ranch was properly zoned for agricultural use. His cattle operation met all health and safety standards, and his noise levels were well within legal limits. But the harassment continued. Code enforcement visits, environmental inspections, demands for proof of water rights and mineral rights. The HOA board was using taxpayer-funded government services to harass a military family into selling their property. Marcus documented every incident, but tried to handle things diplomatically. He was a professional soldier preparing for deployment. He didn't have time for a legal war with entitled neighbors. In March 2021, Marcus deployed to Afghanistan for his final tour. Before leaving, he made sure everything was perfect. Property taxes paid through 2023. All insurance policies current. Maintenance contracts signed. His power of attorney was with his cousin James, a lawyer in Houston. Marcus's last conversation with his father's spirit was standing on that front porch the night before deployment. "Daddy, I'm trusting you to watch over this place. When I get home, we're going to build that veteran center you always talked about." Marcus deployed March 15, 2021. By June, the Heritage Hills HOA board was implementing their final solution to the Williams Ranch problem, because what Marcus didn't know was that Preston Whitfield had spent months researching military deployment laws, looking for loopholes he could exploit. And he thought he'd found one. The Service Members Civil Relief Act protects deployed military members from foreclosure, eviction, and property seizure. But Whitfield believed he'd discovered a technical exception that would allow the HOA to seize the ranch through a different legal mechanism. He was about to learn why you don't mess with military families. Because when the United States Army discovered what Heritage Hills HOA was planning to do to one of their deployed soldiers, they didn't just get angry, they got even. June 20th, 2021. Marcus was at Forward Operating Base Shank in Afghanistan, training Afghan National Army units, when he got a call from his cousin James that changed everything. "Marcus, we have a problem. A big one." The Heritage Hills HOA board had filed a legal action against the Williams Ranch, claiming that Marcus's property violated community improvement standards and represented a health and safety hazard to the surrounding development. But this wasn't a normal HOA violation. This was something much more sinister. The HOA claimed that Marcus's ranch constituted an abandoned property because it wasn't being actively maintained to community standards during his deployment. They argued that the Service Members Civil Relief Act didn't protect abandoned properties, only occupied residences. Their legal theory was insane. Marcus had paid all taxes and fees. He had maintenance contracts. His neighbor Bob was checking the property weekly. The ranch was being maintained better than most suburban lawns. But Preston Whitfield had found a corrupt judge willing to hear his case. Judge Patricia. Hendricks was a former real estate attorney who'd been appointed to the bench after making major political donations. She had financial ties to Premium Communities Corporation through her husband's investment firm. She should have recused herself from any case involving Heritage Hills properties. Instead, she scheduled an emergency hearing for July 15th, 2021. Marcus's cousin James immediately filed motions to dismiss, citing the Service Members Civil Relief Act's clear protections for deployed military personnel. He demanded that the hearing be delayed until Marcus could return from deployment to defend his property. Judge Hendricks denied every motion. She ruled that the hearing would proceed as scheduled, with or without Marcus present. James contacted the Army's Legal Assistance Office, explained the situation, and requested emergency leave for Marcus to return and defend his property. The Army's response was swift. Staff Sergeant Williams is engaged in critical training operations with Afghan forces. He cannot be withdrawn from combat deployment for civilian legal proceedings. Any attempt to seize his property while he's serving overseas will be considered a violation of federal military protection statutes. Judge Hendricks didn't care. On July 15, 2021, she held her hearing in a nearly empty courtroom. James represented Marcus's interests, but the fix was already in. The Heritage Hills HOA presented their case. The Williams Ranch was abandoned, constituted a health hazard, and was incompatible with community development standards. They requested immediate seizure of the property and authorization to sell it to recover. Community improvement costs, James, presented overwhelming evidence that the property was properly maintained, that Marcus was deployed in service to his country, and that federal law explicitly protected deployed service members from property seizure. Judge Hendricks ruled in favor of the HOA. She declared the Williams Ranch abandoned and condemned, authorized its immediate seizure, and scheduled it for auction in 30 days. The legal justification was completely fraudulent. But Preston Whitfield had paid the right people and found the right corrupt judge to rubber stamp his land grab. James immediately filed appeals and contacted every military advocacy organization in Texas. But the Heritage Hills Board was moving fast. On July 20th, they posted foreclosure notices on the Williams Ranch. On July 25th, they hired a security company to protect the condemned property. By August 1st, they were advertising the emergency auction of 40 prime acres of Texas ranch land. The auction was scheduled for August 15th, 2021. Exactly 5 months after Marcus had deployed to serve his country, but Preston Whitfield had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed that a deployed black soldier wouldn't have the resources or connections to fight back from Afghanistan. He was wrong. Marcus wasn't just any soldier. He was a staff sergeant with 15 years of service, 3 combat tours, and more military connections than Preston could imagine. When James called Marcus on August 5th to tell him the auction was proceeding, Marcus didn't panic. He made a phone call to his former commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, who was now working in the Pentagon's Legal Affairs Division. "Colonel, I need help. These people are trying to steal my family's ranch while I'm deployed." Colonel Mitchell's response was immediate. "Staff Sergeant, forward me everything. Nobody steals from our soldiers while they're fighting for their country." Within 24 hours, the U.S. Army's legal department was reviewing the case. Within 48 hours, federal attorneys were being briefed. Within 72 hours, the Pentagon was involved. Because what Preston Whitfield didn't understand was that when you violate federal military protection statutes, you're not dealing with local courts anymore. You're dealing with the United States government. The Army's legal review was devastating. Judge Hendricks had violated multiple federal laws protecting deployed service members. The Heritage Hills HOA had committed fraud, filing false claims about property abandonment while knowing Marcus was deployed. But the most serious issue was the pattern of harassment targeting a black military family. The Army's investigation revealed months of discriminatory complaints, harassment through government agencies, and systematic pressure designed to force Marcus to sell his property. This wasn't just property theft. This was a federal civil rights violation against a deployed service member. On August 10th, 2021, 5 days before the scheduled auction, Preston Whitfield received a phone call that changed his life forever. Mr. Whitfield, this is Lieutenant Colonel James Parker, U.S. Army Judge Advocate General's Corps. You have 24 hours to cancel the auction of Staff Sergeant Williams' property and cease all legal action against his ranch. If you proceed with this sale, you will face federal prosecution for violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to defraud a military family. Preston's response was arrogant and stupid. Colonel, with all due respect, this is a civilian matter being handled through proper legal channels. The military has no jurisdiction over local property disputes. Lieutenant Colonel Parker's reply was ice cold. Mr. Whitfield, you have violated federal law by targeting a deployed service member's property. We absolutely have jurisdiction. Cancel the auction or face the consequences. Preston Whitfield hung up the phone, convinced that the military was bluffing. He was about to learn that the United States Army doesn't bluff when it comes to protecting its soldiers. August 15th, 2021. The day of the auction. Preston Whitfield, Melissa Crawford, and Richard Blackstone arrived at the Heritage Hills Community Center expecting to sell the Williams Ranch to the highest bidder. Instead, they found the community center surrounded by federal agents, Army investigators, and U.S. marshals. The auction wasn't happening. The investigation was beginning, and the United States Army was about to show Heritage Hills HOA what happens when you steal from America's soldiers. August 15th, 2021, 10 a.m. Preston Whitfield walked into the Heritage Hills Community Center expecting to conduct the auction that would make him rich and eliminate the Williams Ranch problem forever. Instead, he walked into the largest federal law enforcement operation. In Texas HOA history, the community center was filled with federal agents wearing windbreakers, marked FBI, Army CID, and U.S. Marshals Service. Tables were set up with computers, evidence collection materials, and enough federal paperwork to bury a corrupt HOA board. Leading the operation was Lieutenant Colonel James Parker, the Army JAG officer who'd warned Preston 5 days earlier. Beside him stood Special Agent Maria Santos from the FBI's Civil Rights Division and Captain Robert Johnson from Army Criminal Investigation Command. Preston's first instinct was denial. What's the meaning of this? We have a legal right to conduct this auction. Lieutenant Colonel Parker's response was professional and devastating. Mr. Whitfield, you are under investigation for violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act, conspiracy to commit fraud, civil rights violations, and theft of military family property. This auction is canceled. This investigation is beginning. But Preston wasn't backing down. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe stupidity, or maybe he genuinely believed his corrupt judge would protect him. We have a court order. Judge Hendricks authorized this sale. Special Agent Santos stepped forward. Mr. Whitfield, Judge Hendricks is also under federal investigation for corruption and civil rights violations. Her order was issued in violation of federal law and is null and void. That's when Preston realized the scope of what he was facing. This wasn't just about the ranch anymore. The federal government was investigating the entire system that had allowed this theft to proceed. The FBI had been investigating Judge Hendricks for months. Her financial connections to Premium Communities Corporation, her pattern of ruling in favor of developers, her husband's investment deals with property development companies. Everything was now under federal scrutiny. But the Army's investigation had uncovered something even more damaging. Heritage Hills HOA wasn't just targeting Marcus Williams. They had a systematic pattern of harassing military families throughout the community. Captain Johnson presented evidence that devastated the HOA board's position. Mr. Whitfield, our investigation shows that Heritage Hills HOA has filed complaints, violations, and legal actions against 12 military families in this community. In every case, the timing coincided with deployments or military training exercises. This represents a pattern of discrimination against service members and their families. The evidence was overwhelming. The Martinez family, Army sergeant deployed to Korea, had faced violation harassment, while the husband was overseas. The Johnson family, Air Force captain on training assignment, had been hit with excessive fines while the wife was at officer school. The Thompson family, Navy lieutenant on submarine duty, had faced property standards violations during a 6-month deployment. Every single case showed the same pattern. Military families being targeted when they were most vulnerable, when service members couldn't be present to defend their properties and families. But the Williams Ranch case was the most egregious because it involved actual property seizure, not just harassment. Melissa Crawford tried to deflect blame onto Preston. "This was Preston's idea. I just went along with board decisions." Lieutenant Colonel Parker wasn't buying it. "Ms. Crawford, you signed every complaint, attended every meeting, and voted to proceed with every action against military families. You are equally responsible for these civil rights violations." Richard Blackstone, the attorney who'd crafted the legal strategy, was the most desperate. "Everything we did was technically legal under state property law." Special Agent Santos's response was brutal. "Mr. Blackstone, federal law supersedes state law when it comes to protecting military families. You knew Staff Sergeant Williams was deployed. You knew federal law protected his property, and you proceeded anyway. That's not a technical violation. That's intentional criminal conduct." The federal agents weren't just investigating the HOA board. They were seizing evidence of the entire conspiracy. Computers were confiscated. Financial records were copied. Email communications were preserved. Phone records were subpoenaed. Bank accounts were frozen pending investigation. But the most shocking discovery came when Army investigators examined the Heritage Hills community's treatment of all military families. Not just the Williams Ranch case. The pattern was systematic and disgusting. Military families paid the same HOA fees as everyone else, but received disproportionate violations, complaints, and harassment. While civilian families might receive 1 or 2 minor violations per year, military families were averaging 15 to 20 citations annually. The violations were clearly designed to drive military families out of the community. Excessive patriotic displays for American flags, noise violations for children playing, vehicle violations for military personnel parking, government vehicles in their own driveways. But the Williams Ranch case had crossed the line from harassment into federal crime. Captain Johnson presented the most damaging evidence. Recorded phone conversations between Preston, Whitfield, and Premium Communities, corporation executives discussing their strategy for removing the ranch obstacle through legal pressure during deployment absence. The recordings proved that the entire auction scheme had been premeditated, that Preston knew Marcus was deployed, and that the HOA board had specifically targeted the property because they believed a deployed black soldier couldn't fight back. But the Army's response proved they'd underestimated both Marcus Williams and the U.S. military's commitment to protecting their own. Lieutenant Colonel Parker announced the federal government's response. Effective immediately, the Heritage Hills Homeowners Association is under federal receivership. All HOA operations will be suspended pending completion of criminal investigations. All assets are frozen. All pending legal actions against military families are dismissed. Preston Whitfield's face went white. "You can't do that!" "We have property rights." "Mr. Whitfield, you forfeited those rights when you violated federal law. The Service Members Civil Relief Act gives the federal government broad authority to protect military families from exactly this kind of predatory behavior." But the Army wasn't finished. Captain Johnson continued. "Additionally, Premium Communities Corporation is under investigation for conspiracy and civil rights violations. All development contracts, property sales, and financial transactions involving Heritage Hills are being reviewed by federal authorities." The scope was breathtaking. The Army wasn't just protecting Marcus Williams. They were investigating an entire system of military family discrimination and property manipulation. Special Agent Santos delivered the final blow. "Mr. Whitfield, Ms. Crawford, Mr. Blackstone, you are each facing federal charges including conspiracy to violate civil rights, fraud, theft of military family property, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Combined, these charges carry potential sentences of up to 40 years in federal prison." Preston Whitfield, the man who'd thought he could steal a deployed soldier's ranch, was looking at spending the rest of his life in federal prison. But the most satisfying moment came when Lieutenant Colonel Parker made a phone call to Afghanistan. "Staff Sergeant Williams, this is Lieutenant Colonel Parker. The auction has been canceled. Your ranch is secure. The people who tried to steal your property are under arrest. You can focus on your mission knowing that the U.S. Army is protecting your family's legacy. Marcus's response, from a forward operating base in Afghanistan, was simple. Thank you, sir. I never doubted my army would have my back. That phone call represented everything the Service Members Civil Relief Act was designed to protect, the promise that American soldiers could serve their country without worrying about predators attacking their families at home. Preston Whitfield had broken that promise. Now he was going to pay the price. The impact of the Heritage Hills federal intervention was immediate, comprehensive, and permanent. Within 24 hours of the canceled auction, every major news network in Texas was covering the story. Army stops HOA from stealing deployed soldiers. Ranch became a national headline that reached military bases worldwide. The story resonated far beyond Texas. Military families across America saw the Heritage Hills case as proof that their service was valued and their property rights were protected, even when they were deployed in combat zones. But the immediate impact was felt most powerfully in the Heritage Hills community itself. The federal receivership meant that every HOA operation was now controlled by court-appointed administrators, working under Army oversight. The harassment of military families stopped immediately. All pending violations against service members were dismissed. All excessive fines were refunded. Preston Whitfield, Melissa Crawford, and Richard Blackstone were arrested on federal charges within a week of the canceled auction. The charges were extensive and damning. Preston Whitfield, conspiracy to violate civil rights, fraud, attempted theft of military property, violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, money laundering, and racketeering. Facing up to 60 years in federal prison, Melissa Crawford, civil rights violations, conspiracy, fraud, and violations of military family protection laws. Facing up to 35 years in federal prison. Richard Blackstone, conspiracy, fraud, legal malpractice, and intentional violations of federal military protection statutes. Facing up to 40 years in federal prison and permanent disbarment. But the criminal prosecutions were just the beginning. Judge Patricia Hendricks was removed from the bench and faced her own federal charges for corruption, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to defraud military families. Her husband's investment firm was investigated for money laundering and fraud. Premium Communities Corporation faced federal civil rights violations, fraud charges, and a comprehensive investigation into their development practices. The company's executives were arrested, and their assets were frozen pending trial. The Heritage Hills development itself underwent a complete transformation. Under federal oversight, the court-appointed administrators implemented new policies designed to protect military families and ensure fair treatment for all residents. HOA fees were reduced to reasonable levels. Violation procedures were reformed to prevent harassment. Military family protections were embedded in the community bylaws. But the most significant impact was on military housing policy nationwide. The Heritage Hills case became a landmark precedent for military family protection. The Pentagon issued new guidance to all military legal assistance offices about protecting deployed service members' property rights. Congress held hearings on military family discrimination in civilian communities. The testimony from Marcus Williams, delivered by video link from Afghanistan, was powerful and moving. I deployed to defend American freedom, Marcus testified. I never thought I'd have to worry about people stealing my family's ranch while I was serving my country. But I also never doubted that my army would protect me and my family. The Heritage Hills case led to the strengthening of the Service Members Civil Relief Act, with new provisions specifically addressing HOA, harassment and property seizure attempts against deployed military. Families. Military advocacy organizations used the case as a model for protecting service members from civilian predators. Legal aid societies developed new protocols for defending military families facing HOA harassment. Real estate industry publications featured the Heritage Hills cases, a warning about the legal and financial consequences of discriminating against military families, but perhaps the most important impact was educational. The case taught America that military families deserve protection not just from foreign enemies, but from domestic predators who would exploit their service to steal their property. Marcus Williams became a symbol of military family resilience and the power of institutional protection. His case showed that the U.S. Army's promise to leave no soldier behind extended to protecting families at home while soldiers served overseas. The financial recovery was complete and comprehensive. Marcus received full compensation for all legal fees, stress damages, and property maintenance costs. The federal government ensured that his military service didn't cost him a single dollar in defending his family's legacy premium. Communities Corporation was forced to pay millions in damages to military families throughout the Heritage Hills community, and other developments where similar discrimination had occurred. The Heritage Hills community emerged from federal oversight as a model for military-friendly residential development, with policies and procedures specifically designed to support service members and their families. But the most satisfying outcome was personal. January 20th, 2022, Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams stepped off a military transport at Joint Base San Antonio, completing his final deployment and his 15-year Army career. Waiting for him at the airfield were his cousin James, his neighbor Bob Martinez, and Lieutenant Colonel James Parker, the Army JAG officer who'd led the federal intervention that saved his ranch. Staff Sergeant Williams, Lieutenant Colonel Parker said, "It's an honor to welcome you home to the ranch your family never lost." Marcus's first stop wasn't his house in San Antonio. It was the Williams family ranch, the 40 acres of Texas legacy that had survived a century of challenges and a criminal conspiracy to steal it while he was serving his country. Driving up the familiar dirt road, Marcus saw that everything was exactly as he'd left it. The limestone house that his grandfather had built, the barns his father had maintained, the pastures where 4 generations of Williams cattle had grazed. But there was something new. A small memorial garden at the front gate with a plaque reading, "In honor of all military families whose service protects the freedoms we enjoy at home." The Heritage Hills community had installed the memorial as part of their federal court-mandated community service, acknowledging their shameful treatment of military families and their commitment to doing better. Marcus stood on his front porch that evening, looking out over the ranch that had almost been stolen, and called his father's spirit one more time. "Daddy, we did it. The ranch is safe, the Veteran Center is going to happen, and nobody's ever going to steal from a military family in Texas again." The criminal prosecutions had been swift and decisive. Preston Whitfield pled guilty to all charges rather than face trial, receiving a 28-year federal prison sentence and forfeiture of all assets involved in the conspiracy. He would be in his 70s before being eligible for parole. Melissa Crawford received 18 years for her role in the discrimination scheme. Richard Blackstone got 25 years and permanent disbarment from practicing law. Judge Patricia Hendricks was sentenced to 15 years for corruption and civil rights violations. Her husband received 12 years for money laundering and conspiracy. Premium Communities Corporation was dissolved, with its assets distributed to victims of their discriminatory practices. The executives received sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years for their roles in systematic military family harassment. But Marcus's victory was more than just criminal justice. It was institutional change that protected all military families. The Williams Ranch Protection Act was passed by Congress, strengthening penalties for anyone who targets military families' property during deployments. The law specifically addresses HOA harassment and provides federal resources for defending service members' property rights. The Department of Defense established a new Military Family Property Protection Office, providing legal assistance to deployed service members facing civilian harassment or property threats. Real estate companies nationwide implemented military family protection policies, recognizing both the legal requirements and the moral obligation to support those who serve. Marcus used his settlement, money and Army retirement, to fulfill his father's dream, the Williams Ranch Veterans Recovery Center. The facility provides therapy, job training, and healing programs for military veterans dealing with combat trauma. The ranch that had almost been stolen became a place where America's heroes could heal and find peace. Military families from across Texas come to the center, knowing they're safe on land that represents the promise that military service will be honored and protected. Lieutenant Colonel Parker, who'd led the federal intervention, retired from the Army and became the center's legal director, ensuring that the lessons of Heritage Hills are never forgotten. The Heritage Hills community underwent a complete transformation. Under new leadership committed to military family support, the development became one of the most veteran-friendly communities in Texas. Property values in Heritage Hills actually increased after the federal intervention. Turns out that supporting military families and operating with integrity is better for property values than criminal conspiracy and discrimination. Marcus married his longtime girlfriend, Army Captain Lisa Rodriguez, in a ceremony held on the ranch. Military families attended their wedding from across the country, people who understood that the Williams Ranch represented more than just property. It represented the promise that America protects those who protect America. Today, if you drive past the Williams family ranch, you'll see a thriving veteran recovery center surrounded by the same 40 acres of Texas land that Marcus's great-great-grandfather purchased in 1905. The legacy continues, stronger than ever. And Preston Whitfield? He's in federal prison, probably wishing he'd never heard of stuff. Sergeant Marcus Williams, or the United States Army's commitment to protecting military families. The moral of Marcus's story isn't just about property rights or military protection. It's about the promise America makes to its service members. We will defend you abroad and at home. When you serve your country serves you. Marcus learned that the Army's promise to leave no soldier behind extends to protecting families while soldiers are deployed. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought in courtrooms and communities, defending the freedoms that make military service meaningful. The Williams Ranch survived because Marcus Williams never forgot who he was fighting for. And when criminals tried to steal his family's legacy, the United States Army reminded everyone that some things are worth fighting for, and that America always protects its own. HOA, Staff Sergeant Williams. HOA. Are you a military family dealing with HOA harassment or discrimination? Do you know a service member whose property rights have been threatened? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might help other military families know their rights and protections. If this story of Army justice and military family protection inspired you, subscribe to the Community Chronicles for more incredible true stories of justice, courage, and communities standing up for what's right. Hit that notification bell so you never miss tales of heroes, justice, and the power of institutional protection for those who serve.